welcome back to the Chargers Check-In. You guys, Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz got it done. We got Mike McDaniel. Technically, he hasn't signed the paperwork. Technically, he can still back out and take one of those head coaching jobs, but all reports indicate that Mike McDaniel is going to accept the role of offensive coordinator for the Chargers. This is the best possible outcome. When I talked about all of the options, most of them were kind of dart throws. Like, this could end up working out really well, but we don't really know. We know what Mike McDaniel is, and we know that he is great at scheming and offense. And in a lot of ways, this is a complete 180 to what they had before, and we're going to get into all of the differences and everything. But make no mistake, Jim Harbaugh made this happen. This is one of the reasons that Jim Harbaugh is one of the best coaches in the league, because coaches want to coach for him. You know, I know that we don't want Jesse Minter to go, but Coach Harbaugh does everything he can to get his coaches as far as they can go, and that is why great coaches want to coach for him. And make no mistake, I know there's a lot of questions about Herbert after the mistakes he's made in the playoffs, but Mike McDaniel looks at Herbert and goes, yeah, I want to coach that guy. That's huge. You know, he could have gone to the Eagles. You know, he definitely was being considered by the Lions, but instead he is going to be with the Chargers. This is a massive turning point for the organization, and we're going to get into all that, but make no mistake, the Super Bowl window opens now. So like I said, Jim Harbaugh made this happen. I know there's a prevalent belief that Jim Harbaugh is a very old school coach, and so to go with that, he doesn't like change, he's outdated, and I don't agree with that. And I said in my members video last week that I really think the personalities here are a great fit. Number one thing is they're both very positive. They both empower players as much as they possibly can. And while McDaniel is a little more honest with the media about how his players are doing, Jim will never say anything negative about his players. Both of them are trying to get the most out of them by bringing all the confidence. I don't think Tua Tagovailoa was ever a great quarterback, but something he always said about McDaniel is McDaniel was bringing the best out of him, you know, and he was positive and he believed in him. And McDaniel and Harbaugh both love football so much. And I think that that's one of those things that I knew that if they could get McDaniel in the building, Jim would like him a lot. It was just a matter of would he buy into a complete scheme change like this. And we will get into why the roster is not locked into any one scheme. But overall, I think this makes a lot of sense. And I think after seeing how Herbert sounded in that post-game press conference after the playoff game, I think that was when Harbaugh knew, like, okay, you can't, if you took this head coaching job and you want it to be your last coaching job and you think this is your shot at the Super Bowl and your quarterback starts sounding like he doesn't believe himself in the playoffs, yeah, you got to look at who is guiding him. And I think we can agree that Greg Roman never really pushed Herbert to be better. He just kind of sat back and expected Herbert to fix problems. Mike McDaniel is going to have the opposite approach. He is going to expect Herbert to be better because he's going to give Herbert all the tools he needs to be better. So the weirdo energy in the Chargers building is about to go insane. I cannot wait for the media. Oh, I cannot wait for the preseason media. And there's going to be off-season media with every, like, the OTAs and every little bit is going to be so entertaining between Harbaugh and McDaniel, sure, but also Herbert and also all the other weirdos on the team. Dayon, their interactions are going to be incredible. And I know that Dan's already tweeted about this, and, you know, Derwin's been excited about this, which just kind of shows how frustrated the defense has been with the offense, you know, and other reasons why Harbaugh needed to make a change. You got to make sure that your defense continues to buy in, and the defense is very much in their Super Bowl window, so it was time for the offense to catch up. And Harbaugh is already one of the strangest people in the NFL. So is McDaniel, and it's only going to be compounded together. I'm going to get into all the details, but I do want to say Mike McDaniel is one of my favorite coaches of all time. He, like, watching him coach made me want to be a coach. Like, I went out and got a coaching job, not in football, in softball, what I played. You know, I tried to be inspired by Mike McDaniel in a lot of ways by, like, trusting players, explaining the why all the time so that they get smarter, and, you know, putting your personality into things and not forcing a coach persona, you know, and I think that's, generally speaking, a really good thing. Mike McDaniel, I don't know if you guys really followed the Dolphins last year, but after their season kind of went off a cliff and Tua started really regressing, the thing is, Mike McDaniel, he continued to have the locker room with him. If you watch the few times that they did win in the second half of the season, and they did win, the locker room after the game would be so hyped. They would be having so much fun. It would be all smiles. It's really hard to get a group of people whose goal is to make the playoffs and win playoff games excited about regular season games when they know that they can't make the playoffs like that. But he did. You know, I think his love for football is infectious in the same way that Harbaugh's is. And I think this offense is going to be unlocked this year. And if you like interesting podium talk after the game, these post-game press conferences are about to get a lot more interesting because Jesse Minter was the guy to listen to this last year. He's probably not going to be there this year, which we'll talk about at the end of the video. But Mike McDaniel always has interesting press conferences. Sometimes you're like, wow, he just took 10 minutes to explain something that could have been 2 sentences, but he's interesting and you learn something about football every time. So, you know, I rooted for the Dolphins just because of wanting to watch more of Mike McDaniel and wanting to watch him in the playoffs and all that. I will say, like, I had to hear Tua at the podium every week, so I was like, all right, I think I'm done. You know, the contrast between Tua and Herbert could not be more clear. But this is going to be awesome. The off-season content and the in-season content, it's all going to be fantastic. And I want to talk a little bit about the differences between McDaniel and Roman, a little bit more in terms of how they use their players, not just in terms of personality, because obviously Roman's personality was going to Keenan Allen and saying, I know you're not used to this, but I call games to win. I'm sure you guys heard that quote. Yeah, pretty insulting thing to say to a veteran. Or when he said, this is not a Burger King offense. Then what is it? It's not a good offense. So let's get into their differences schematically. So last year, you know, the Dolphins had a really rough year, didn't have a good quarterback, and say what you will about Herbert in the playoffs, but he had a great year in the regular season. So the Chargers were actually worse than the Dolphins in offensive EPA last year. Despite the Dolphins losing 10 games, they finished 7-10. The margin becomes massive in the red zone. We can expect significantly more creativity when touchdowns are on the line. The Chargers last year had one of the worst completion percentages in the league in the red zone, which is crazy because so many times in the red zone it was like, why aren't they running the ball? Oh, we're just passing every single time. Okay, and then it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't work. They'd finally run the ball, get stuffed at the line, and that would be it. The Dolphins were top 10 in completion percentage in the league in the red zone. That is going to be a huge difference. That was one of the biggest issues we had with Roman, is the route tree became very simple all of a sudden when space was limited. And we know that McDaniel can work in limited space because Tua can't throw very far. I don't mean to shade Tua so much. It's just, I think we're going to see McDaniel on another level. I think the explosive potential of the run game, which is McDaniel's biggest strength, is going to be realized this year. He can create a numbers advantage for a running back to get in space with full speed. I think the quick game is obviously a strength of him. McDaniel's used to drawing it up very fast because he's got to get the ball out of Tua's hands quickly because he's had all those concussions and you don't want him to take any more hits. You know, we've seen him have his season ended early because of that, but also because Tua has a really quick release. That was Tua's strength, and so McDaniel wanted to use that. And so we saw how good at that McDaniel got. So when the Chargers play some of these better pass rushing teams, you can expect a real game plan against it, which is going to be a huge difference. You can expect screens, reverses, running backs in the passing game, you know, motion, explosive plays. It's going to be a totally different look and different feel than last year. Herbert being there should open up the playbook in a serious way. Like I said, Tua never really had the arm strength to get the most out of the faster receivers, but Herbert has as strong of an arm as anyone in the league. He's pretty accurate down the field, and so he really allows you to use the entire field because Herbert can throw it that far. Herbert can also run the ball. And, you know, it's not that Tua couldn't move. It was just that with all the concussions, you don't want him running the ball. And when he ran the ball, he often did a very bad job of protecting his head in particular. There are times when I wish Herbert would protect himself better, but even then, he's usually getting hit in the upper body, not the head. And part of the reason for that is because he's like 6'6". He's almost 6'7", I believe. When he runs into other players, they aren't running into his head. They're running into his shoulders. They're running into his chest or his side. And so he is just more durable because he's a larger man. This is going to be great for Herbert's confidence. You know, that's always Mike McDaniel's priority. He pushes players, and Herbert's arm is a lot better than Tua's. He can run the ball. He's durable. He's accurate, you know, and I think he'll be a lot less frustrating at the podium for Mike. But I also want to talk about Omarion Hampton because I've already seen some concerns that, you know, Omarion Hampton isn't really the Mike McDaniel type of running back just because he isn't Devon Achane, but I actually think Hampton is perfect for McDaniel because imagine Omarion Hampton, but he actually gets a few steps before contact to get to full speed. You know how many tackles he broke behind the line this year, how many yards after contact he got, where, we look at the run play and we go, it's a gain of 2. But from Hampton's perspective, he's like, well, I made 3 guys miss and I ran through 2 more. And I turned what should have been a negative play because of how it was blocked into a positive play, and that's one of those things that I think Mike McDaniel is going to fix really fast. And he's a bigger back, but he's not slow. He can act as a receiver. He can run through contact. And once he gets his feet going, he's a fast running back. And so to me, there's nothing more you could want in a back for Mike McDaniel. There's no limitation. Any scheme he wants to run, any kind of play he wants to run, he is able to do that with Amarian Hampton. And if he really, really needs speed for something, he has Ladd McConkey. We have the players to make it work. We'll talk about the receivers in a minute, but Kamani Vidal is also a solid fit because of his speed, his shiftiness on the outside. I think this continues to be a good 1-2 punch from the running back room. And Kamani Vidal is also a solid pass catcher. So there's so many options for disguising things. I would not be shocked if we got both running backs on the field at once for some of these scenarios. We'll get into how this affects the roster, but this is a fantastic move. It means the Super Bowl window opens up for the Chargers this year. And just because Mike McDaniel is likely only here for 1 year does not mean that window necessarily closes. Ideally, this creates a coaching pipeline, kind of like what we have on defense, right? We're like, well, if Jesse Minter leaves, we do have Klingscale, we have Elston, we have choices, right? That's the main thing. Maybe it involves Frank Smith, who could be an offensive coordinator in waiting, because if Frank Smith were to follow Mike McDaniel, he wouldn't be the play caller. So if he wants a play calling offensive coordinator job that could lead to him eventually being a head coach, he would be better off staying with the Chargers. Doesn't mean that it's guaranteed that just because Mike is there, that also means Frank Smith is there, but it's just something to think about. And this is a whole new tree of connections for skill position coaches who will want to be there because they know that the Chargers are going to need a new play caller next year. And so that is how you get a pipeline going. Coaches want to coach somewhere where they're going to have growth opportunities. They don't want to coach somewhere where they're like, well, this guy's been the offensive coordinator for forever, so I guess I just have to hope my reputation gets good enough that another team who's never worked with me and has never seen me call plays is just going to trust that they want me in their building. It's one of those things that we as fans don't see a lot because we don't get to see the ins and outs. We just kind of have to trust the league's perceived reputation for these guys, right? But coaches care about that. So I think this will affect their ability to attract good skill position coaches, and also for Mike McDaniel to bring in some of his guys, and he's worked on some very talented offensive coaching rosters. That being said, let's talk about what this means for the roster. The Chargers have a lot of cap space this offseason. Like I said, there's a lot that they need to re-sign. They're going to go through it quickly, but they're in a better position than a lot of teams. So at least for a couple positions on offense, if Mike McDaniel really wants somebody, the Chargers can make that go happen. And as long as it's somebody relatively versatile, you could believe that the next coach after McDaniel would also be able to work with them. And the reason I believe that is because you have both tackles and they're versatile. You have a quarterback who is very accurate and can also run. And you have a solid wide receiver core. I don't know that the wide receiver core is necessarily complete. That's something I want to look at this offseason. I don't know what's going to happen with Keenan, but maybe you add a piece there, but I think the main thing you're looking at is how does McDaniel's scheme lend itself to looking at centers and right guards? And from my perception, he's going to want the most athletic center possible, which just about guarantees that Bradley Bozeman is out. Bozeman makes more sense for Greg Roman. He has a really good anchor. He's good against bull rushing types, but with Bozeman, I just don't know that he has the mobility to do everything that McDaniel would want him to do. So they can draft a center, they can sign a center. People talk a lot about Tyler Linderbaum. I think Linderbaum would work well in this offense because I think Linderbaum would work well in just about every offense. It's just a matter of, does he hit free agency? And if he does, then you're also competing with John Harbaugh and the Giants, because Harbaugh supposedly wants to take a bunch of players from the Ravens who are free agents, which makes sense. That's, absolutely what we would expect. But he's not the only option. This is going to be, I think, a better center free agency than most years. We'll have to see, what teams are able to re-sign their guys and who isn't. But if the Chargers prioritize center, they should be able to outbid just about anyone. And the same is also true with right guard. I think right guard, you're also going to want someone who's very athletic because, you look at Zion and you look at Joe Alt and you think, yeah, they're going to be very, very athletic in the left guard. And I don't know if Joe Alt's going to be right or left tackle, but I'm going to say right tackle position. So if you can get an athletic center and you can get an athletic right guard, you are in a very good position to run whatever McDaniel wants to run. So McDaniel will presumably have a say in those kind of situations. And I think, as much as people say this isn't a great center draft, I think for McDaniel's purposes, it kind of is. I'm looking at a few different guys and I think there are good, even day 3 options for this, which is really exciting. And I want to look at how does this affect receivers? I wonder, is this the end of Keenan Allen's time with the Chargers? He, I don't think, is as good of a fit with this. We've talked about how Ladd and Trey need to have bigger roles, and I think QJ is going to kind of rise as more of the red zone guy, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Like I think I talked about it in my members video maybe, if they re-sign Keenan, it needs to be on the lowest possible contract, and he cannot afford to replace the role that would be Trey Harris or Ladd McConkey in any way. Speaking of Ladd McConkey, this to me is a serious stock up moment for Ladd McConkey. I think this is going to be his best year yet. I know that's saying something because he had a heck of a rookie year, but Mike McDaniel uses motion at the highest rate in the league, and it's not close. The next team is way below his rate, and so I think Ladd McConkey is going to be your main motion guy. He's fast, he's twitchy, he can make guys miss without even touching him. I expect, will be the main motion guy. He's going to be the guy downfield that when you see people breaking down tape of the Chargers, they're going to be like, whoa, he's open by 5 yards. He's open by 5 yards. No one is close to him, so he catches the ball, lands, and then he can make his moves in open space because that is where Ladd is his best, right? We saw so many times his rookie year making several guys miss. I remember against the Raiders, he jukes to the right, makes a guy miss. 5 yards later, right at the end zone, jukes to the right again and makes a guy miss, like same exact move, but they just can't touch him. This is going to be a Ladd McConkey reawakening year. And you could see in his, end of season interview, he was very frustrated with how the season went. He was frustrated that he didn't get the ball as often. And, I think there's a lot to be excited about with his role in a Mike McDaniel offense going forward. Trey Harris should have a bigger role too. I expect he will be also a point guy for reverses, jet sweeps, other backfield plays. I would expect to see him used as a blocker on screens, on outside runs, and I think he will be, over the course of the season, more and more of a red zone target this year, especially on those quick passes. And I think we're going to see a lot of those, especially against teams with better pass rush. I also wonder if this increases the likelihood that they draft another wide receiver. I think they wanted more out of Keandre Lambert-Smith than they got this year, and I think they might be looking to get another returner anyways, so I wonder if they draft another wide receiver on day 3 or the back half of day 2. Either way, it is still possible that Keandre Lambert-Smith gets a little better sense of how to line up, how to avoid getting penalties, how to be on the same page as Herbert. Mike McDaniel, one of his strengths as a coach is just communication, making sure that players understand what they're doing and why. And so that could be something that we see helps KLS grow as well, which would be a big deal. And that would be something that could really open up the deep part of the field because he is probably the fastest receiver that they have, given that I assume that Darius Davis will not be on this team next year. In terms of tight ends, I expect Gadsden to have a significant role in this offense. I think he's exactly the profile of tight end that Mike McDaniel would like. Tucker Fisk could end up being replaced. I think it's possible that they'll find someone on day 3 of the draft, maybe in free agency, who can do what Tucker Fisk does for blocking, but also catch passes a little bit better. Not a lot better, but just a little bit better. And I wonder if Scott Matlock, the fullback, not a tight end, but fullback, is probably only used in short yardage runs where they have 7 guys on the line. I think that's something that Mike McDaniel isn't going to use often, but I do think it's possible he uses that sometimes, especially if you get a smaller center and right guard. You might, for the sake of running the ball in short situations into traffic, you may want to keep a bigger tight end / fullback for the sake of those situations. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. It would not shock me if they draft or sign another pass catcher at this spot, someone a little bit like Gadsden, but bigger, someone who can run routes and is there to catch the ball, but, maybe a little bit thicker than Gadsden. Think of like a Cole Kmet kind of profile of a player. But most importantly, Justin Herbert, his stock should go way up. He's the best quarterback McDaniel has worked with. McDaniel is great at building enough around a quarterback that they don't have to be a superhero all the time, something we've talked a lot about as a flaw of Greg Roman's, right? Herbert also, he needs to be comfortable and able to play his best for most of the game. We know he can do a lot better than he did against New England than, under Greg Roman, right? We know that he can do better in a better system. We know that he can do better when he's not being killed all game, because if somehow the Chargers end up with as bad of an offensive line as last year, which I think is impossible pretty much, but if they were, Mike McDaniel can run a quick game. We know that for sure. And so that's probably the most exciting thing. Herbert will not be hit this year as often as last year. Last year he was hit a historical amount of times. And so this year it should be completely different. So there's so much to be excited about. Herbert is one of those quarterbacks that I know media people don't love him because media people don't love the Chargers, and he hasn't done well in the playoffs, so Chargers fans are starting to have their doubts. But to me, I look at Mike McDaniel and I go, well, he could have gone and coached the Eagles. He could have gone and coached that talented wide receiver room and Saquon, and they have good offensive linemen, and, it would not be hard to get more out of Jalen Hurts than you saw this year. And he could have gone the Dan Campbell route, right, and gone to Detroit. He could have gone to Tampa Bay and been kind of the next head coach in waiting. But instead, he chose to come to the West Coast, look at Justin Herbert and say, yeah, I can get more out of you. I can make you better. And it is going to get me opportunities because I'm going to make you so much better. That's really promising for Chargers fans. And I know there's this feeling among Chargers fans, well, now Jesse Minter will want to stay. And you guys, I don't think that this is going to make Jesse Minter want to stay. Do I think it would make him feel better if he had to stay? Yeah, I do. Of course. Right? There's no way Jesse Minter was looking at the other side of the ball and going, well, I think we're doing about equal here. I think we're contributing an equal amount to this team, right? There's no way. But Minter has gotten a second round of interviews at the Ravens, the Raiders, and the Browns, and I fully expect him to accept one of those jobs. For our sake, as Chargers fans, I hope it's with the Browns, so that he isn't a problem right away because they don't really have a quarterback and he isn't in the AFC West, but I really think he will be hired by the end of the week, unless these teams are wanting to wait, because then they can interview coaches on the Patriots staff, the Broncos, Seahawks, and Rams. And I know, especially the Rams and the Seahawks have a lot of coaches that a lot of teams are interested in for head coaching positions and offensive coordinator positions, and also defensive coordinator positions, now that I'm thinking of it. But I fully anticipate that Jesse Minter will be gone next season, and I am okay with that, because this is such a huge step up on the offensive side that I think the Chargers will be significantly better than they were last year, which is a fantastic position to be in. Plus, you have all these players coming back who presumably won't be injured next year. This year is going to be electric. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the AFC West in general, because I kind of hope these teams wait, because the Chargers have an in-house guy anyways that they could use at defensive coordinator with Klinkskill, and it's possible that the Broncos could lose a significant number of coaches. They could lose Davis Webb. He is the quarterback's coach, and I think he's the passing game coordinator. He's getting a lot of head coaching hype, but he might be hired as an offensive coordinator. I have to imagine he'll be given a bigger role somewhere than what he has now with the Broncos. Jim Leonard, on the defensive side, I think it's possible that he could be gone. I think he's the passing game coordinator on the defensive side, and Vance Joseph, their defensive coordinator, is getting a lot of head coaching attention as well, but teams can't quite interview them yet, so they might be wanting to wait. The Chiefs might lose Matt Nagy, so they will be looking for someone on the offensive side. Matt Nagy, he's gotten a lot of interviews, he's gotten a lot of buzz, but I think he is going to be a lot of teams' second option, not a lot of teams' first option, but that could also just be a projection of what I think of him. And the problem with Minter not being officially hired at this point is we have to wait to interview defensive play callers, right? The Chargers can't go out and interview guys because technically Minter is still there. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens after the next few days, and then after next weekend, when a lot more coaches become available for interviews and a lot more dominoes will fall. But the most important thing for the Chargers was accomplished yesterday with Jim Harbaugh, Chad Alexander, and Joe Ortiz. So I got to give them a lot of credit for what they have pulled off this offseason. This is already the most successful offseason of the Harbaugh era, and I'm so excited to see what they do in free agency with the draft, and obviously on the defensive side with what happens. I hope Minter stays, but I really don't think that's going to be the case. But let me know, guys, what what do you think is the ceiling of this team with Mike McDaniel and Jim Harbaugh? You know, what do you think with like $100 million in cap space that they can accomplish this year? Because personally, I really think the Super Bowl window opens now. And I am so excited to get into this offseason. Man, don't you feel different than a week ago? Don't you feel different? I guess I should say than right after they lost to the Patriots. And it was like, man, I guess this is it. This is not it. You know, they have turned a new corner. We're going to be getting into the Mike McDaniel scheme this offseason. We are going to talk about what he likes out of his players, what he tends to, you know, get out of his quarterbacks, and everything that we possibly can to understand what to expect from Herbert, from Hampton, from Ladd, and from this offense this offseason. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys being here. Don't forget that members get exclusive content. Members get early access to draft videos. I will be making a draft video later this week for members. We're going to be looking at the top edge rushers of the draft, and we're going to be going very deep into everything, especially because some of the best ones just played for the national championship. So very exciting draft class to look at. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. We got Mike McDaniel. Whoa! Whoa! Don't you care? Why don't you care? Okay.